Hello, I'm Ollie from Eurogamer, and welcome to the developer sessions at EGX 2017. Coming up in an hour's time, Jake Solomon from Firaxis will be talking to us about how they saved XCOM from complete disaster. But now, talking about his massively multiplayer-inspired board game, City of Kings, please welcome Frank West.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Frank from the City of Kings, and today I would like to take you on an adventure. This is an adventure that started for me a long time ago. I've spent my whole life playing video games. I enjoy games, and I've always been in that digital kind of world. I used to run home from school to get back to complete the next part of Final Fantasy. I got a huge phone bill for Phantasy Star Online, and I was born in this world, and I wanted to design my own fantasy adventure. The problem was I never got to a point where I could create my own video game. I spent all this time trying, but I never found the right people to work with and the right situation that I could do it. So I kind of gave up on this vision. But then one day something strange happened, something that I never expected. I learned that Monopoly wasn't the only board game, and there are many, many other options. This up on the screen here is a game called Dead of Winter. This is a cooperative game where you're all playing together and you're playing against the board. When you play this game, you can choose how long you want to play for. And these were things that were unfamiliar to me and the board game world. And then as I moved on to other games, I started to find things like Forbidden Desert. And you can see this track in the middle where you can choose the difficulty that you want to play that game on. All of these things kept saying to me, video game, video game. Pandemic Legacy, the first game that really gave me a video game story. As you play through this game, you rip up pieces, you put stickers on the board, and you change that world. I used to play this game, and when I finished it, I just wanted to play the next bit. It was like when I was at school again, kind of coming home to play the next level. And all of these things started to change the way I thought about board games. This is a little game called Meeple Circus. It's a tiny game that you can play in 10 minutes. You're balancing little bits of wood to do circus acts, which is a really, really fun game. This is a game called Twilight Imperium. This is a huge game that can take 12 hours to play, and for some people, a lot longer than that. And as you can see, the amount of stuff on the table, the variance in all of these games was so much more than I ever imagined was possible. And I have a lot of games. I challenged my girlfriend to let me build a fort over her head with our board games. This was the point where apparently it became unstable and I had to stop. Something I've still not been able to do with my Steam library, and one thing that board games for me gives is that physical feel. It's having ownership of something. And over time, all of these games said one thing. And then Eclipse came along, and I played this game. And you can see these giant gray sheets around the board, character sheets that allow you to design your character as you go. You kind of improve your empire, and you customize it. So all of these things said to me, I can now make the video game that I've dreamed about as a board game. So I did what anyone would do, and I got on a plane and I went to Amsterdam because I wanted to be creative. Now, I say that, I was working there for a few months, and I started to build this prototype. I started to put this game together, and I found that this fantasy cooperative adventure, this MMORPG-inspired board game, was coming out of my head and starting to take form. And I spent a lot of time thinking, what do I believe is in an MMORPG? Because for me, that's what I wanted to create. I wanted to turn this into a board game. That epicness of raiding and open world exploration. So I started to build this world. I started to sketch out ideas. And with a small team, we started to create this universe. We started to put together the City of Kings and to give it its place in our world. Now, this makes us have to start with building story, because for me, an RPG is as much about the background, the story, the stuff that's happening behind, as it is about the mechanics. So we started to create these characters. We sketched out concepts, trying to understand our own takes on the races and the characters we wanted. As they started to evolve and started to take form, you can see that these characters started to become these final art forms that we have now. And you can see these out on our stand in kind of giant size. But these are just some of the characters that build up this world, and each of them have their own background. And you can't have a game without a warrior penguin, which I wear proudly on my shirt, because this builds up the world. This is the unique part for us, which is different to the other games that we've been playing. So with the world building, we started to design the game. And the first thing for me is open world. I want immersion, I want exploration. So we took these map tiles, which are these green tiles you see on the board, and we've put them face down on a table. We shuffled them, and we put them out. The green tiles are our starting area. This is a starting zone that you'll be familiar with in a lot of these games. And once you start getting progressively through these tiles, you'll move to the orange zone and so on, and they get harder and harder. So we created a sense of exploration, and every time you play the game, you shuffle the tiles and you place them back out. So you start to have this new world to explore, and whilst you know the places, you're never quite sure what you're going to find. So as you explore across this board, we've got our side quest location where you're going to meet NPCs. And NPCs give you quests, and you can choose if you want to do these quests or not. But we wanted to take this more than what you can do in a video game. Obviously, in the digital world, you're going to have all the kind of standard quests we're familiar with, like go and kill something, or bring something over here, or escort this person. But we wanted to add a physical side. So we introduced this old lady, and her cart's broken down. And you actually have to help her stack the wood back onto a physical piece in the game. So we started to add these kind of physical dexterity challenges as kind of micro quests within this universe to make you feel like you're more involved in what you're doing. As you explore across, we then thought you can't have an MMORPG without fishing, so we started to add resources. We added a lake and a forest and several others, and you can go to these locations to start working, doing professions to gain resources. And for me, this started to take shape. We had this open world we could explore. Now we could gather resources. Now we could start doing quests. We'd obviously go to a shop, and when we went to a shop, we could start buying items. Now, for me, the items are one of the interesting parts in this development process because we're talking about paintings, we're talking about pieces of art, we're not talking about 3D worlds that you can move around in. And every piece that we do takes time, and we don't have huge budgets, so we needed to find a way to build this world without spending years just drawing additional artwork and pieces. So for each of the item cards in the game, we created these scenes and we gave them their own story. So every item card is designed to invoke some sort of emotion. They're set in an area. They give you some sort of indication of what might be going on. And there's backstories that go with each of these cards that give you this overview of this world. So as you explore through the game, you're going to start to get glimpses. You're going to get things that are going to make you laugh, things that are going to make you cry. And we've had people crying, which really surprised me. People are going to throw cards on the floor as they realize that thing in front of them is actually a giant spider with some boots hiding in it. People are going to ask what things are, and they start to look at these pieces. And again, this physical world of being able to hold these cards and bring them up to your face and kind of look into that detail helps to build this world. So we started to find this world was evolving. And with these resources and all of these other things, we wanted you to be able to impact that world. So you can see now we've got this farm location, which is just a patch of land. But as you play through the game, you're going to be able to start building on this location by putting new pieces on top of this tile. And you can start to build up structures. And those structures give you additional places and things that you can do as you explore. So we've got this open world. We can go around, we can gather resources, and we're now approaching the orange, more dangerous areas. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a stable, so we've got some quick travel. So you can instantly move from one stable to another stable, which means that as you progress across this world, you can jump back to the starting locations, go back to town, and do things, and then go back out. So as you'd expect, the fast travel kind of allows you to cross that land quicker once you're starting to progress further. So we're far out, we're away from town, and we're starting to introduce some creature tiles. Now, you might be able to see up on the screen that these two tiles have a yellow triangle on the left side in the top left corner, and then two red squares in the top right corner. So the creatures in this game are where the game becomes really interesting and really difficult from a physical design perspective. When you're playing with a video game, you can have algorithms and random generation, and things can change as you progress through this world. But with a physical game, everything has to be in the box. You can't really say to someone, can you just write these numbers on a piece of paper and kind of use that? I mean, you can, but it's not the experience. We wanted this world to create itself. So we went down the system of how can we create creatures where every single one is always different, and it's always balanced, and it's always interesting, and it gives you decisions, but it changes the way you play in this world. So we took these creature templates. The first thing we did is we got some stat bars. And these stat bars are fairly straightforward. They tell you how much health the creature's got, how much healing it's got, how much damage it can do, and so on. It tells you how much XP you get when you kill it. And as you play through the game, you move through these stat bars. Now, that's fairly standard. And it's great, because when you get to the next creature, it's going to be better than the last creature, and so on. But the problem is the next time you play the game, that creature's going to be the same, and you're going to have that same experience. So we tried to introduce something, and with all the technology in the world, we came up with 3 colored bags. And these 3 colored bags define the uniqueness in this game. So we've got the easy bag, the medium bag, and the hard bag, and each of them is filled with tokens. There are 50 different tokens between these bags and a few duplicates. There's about 100 to 150 in total. And when you encounter creatures, if you remember I mentioned on those map tiles earlier, the different colored shapes in the top left corner, they represent these different colored bags. And also on these stat bars, you can see in the bottom left under the bag icon that again, there are different icons underneath some of them. And these all represent situations that tell you how many things to take out of which colored bag. And these creatures start to define themselves. So I might end up taking just 2 green abilities out of the green bag, and now my creature has the ability to move and to shoot firebolts. Now, these abilities drastically change the behavior. If it didn't get movement, it would be standing still. But now it can move around the board, and it can also throw fire at me. Another creature might have Poison Cloud and Panic. Poison Cloud means it's going to spread poison around it, and Panic means that I'm going to run around in a direction without any control. So if I'm too close to that creature, I'm going to run through that poison. But what this means is now as you take these tokens, these creatures have different abilities, and they have different ways of behaving. You can see the red ones here in Rage and Phoenix. But suddenly you can get a combination where you have 1 green, 1 yellow, and 2 red. Or maybe you have 6 green or 7 yellow, or so on. And as you play through the game, they get more and more abilities that mean they behave completely differently. The top right, the Enrage ability, means the creature's going to get stronger every turn. So now there's a priority for me to come and kill that creature quickly. But you might get another ability that means that this creature is going to hit you for loads, but it's not going to move. Have you ever played games where you've kind of run around a corner and then there's a giant creature and you die in like 2 seconds? I was playing Final Fantasy 15 and I was running down this mountain and there's a giant snake at the bottom, and I looked at my girlfriend and said, I'm going to kill that snake, and I got there and it was like 10 levels higher and I died in like 2 seconds. And that frustration, but the enjoyment of later on knowing I could come back and I'd be able to kill it. So these creatures give you that ability to generate strong creatures and weak creatures. And this became really, really challenging to balance. So this is the only graph in my presentation, and I'm not even sure if I would call it a graph. It's kind of just dots on a line. But we're going to go through it, so keep with me. The first red circles with the numbers above them kind of represent the power, the level of the players. So as you progress, you're obviously going to get stronger. And the blue ones in between represent the kind of strengths of the creatures as you progress through the game. And to start with, you'll see that the blue ones are a little bit below the red ones, and they start to go up and they start to go down, and then they start to drastically vary. And how we balance this game is we knew that the creatures would get harder because the stat bars would make them harder, and we knew we were taking abilities out of the bags. So we measured the strongest worst-case scenario in any situation and the weakest situation, and we made sure that both of those kind of ends were within the parameters we wanted. So sometimes you're going to find a creature and it's going to be artificially strong, but that's intentional to give you that feeling of running down that mountain and running into that snake and dying and knowing you can come back later. Other creatures you're going to kill really quickly and you're just going to plow through them, but then suddenly you're going to run through them so quickly you're going to get to this giant creature and you need to go back and you need to kind of recover and start planning for how you're going to overcome it. So these creatures being generated mean that we obviously are going to have to get stronger. And this is the scary thing, where everyone's going to run out of the room and look at it and go, oh my goodness, look at all the stuff on the screen. And I'm going to say, if you've ever played any RPG on a video game or D&D or anything along those lines, I could teach you this in less than a minute and you could be playing this game. Because this is designed around basic attributes that people are going to understand. And one of the complexities with a board game is you don't have a digital kind of tutorial. You have nothing to teach. You have a rule book and no one wants to read that. So you need to make sure that it's simple to learn and simple to understand. So these character sheets, you can see at the top here, have a bunch of stats with some yellow and red cubes. In the top, we've got health. And this represents how much health you've got. The yellow cube is your maximum health, the red cube is your current health. So if a creature hits me for 2, the red cube's going to move down by 2, and if I get healed, it's going to go back up. If the red cube ever gets to the end, then I've died, and obviously it can never go above my maximum health. If I level up, I'm going to gain more maximum health, and I can heal myself back up. Fairly standard kind of stuff, but in this instance, you're just tracking it with a cube. Attack represents how much damage you do. Healing represents how much you can heal for. Range represents how far you can reach. Movement represents how far you can move. And luck is basically like critical strike. So if you want to have some crazy randomness, when you attack something, you can throw some dice, and depending on your luck, it will modify the values that you get. So rather than attacking for 5, you might now attack for 7, or you might attack for 3. So it introduces a randomness that you can customize into your character. But all of this stuff is fairly straightforward, and you can start to build your own roles. So if you increase your range by loads, and you've got a lot of attack, then maybe you're more of an archer. But if you don't increase that, and you increase your kind of movement, then maybe you're going to take more of a rogue kind of personality and run around quickly. So if you increase your health, you can start becoming a tank. So in this game, it's based around the Holy Trinity, and combat is based around the concept of raiding. It's a strategic kind of positional play where you all need to work together. You need to keep the tank alive. You need to heal. You need to have damage dealers running around whilst you're managing other things to overcome each of these creatures. At the bottom here, you can see we've got equipment, and equipment's quite straightforward. You put the equipment cards on there, and it shows you what you've got. But you've also got the skill tree. And just like any other game you've probably played, as you level up, you're going to be able to start putting discs on here to unlock skills. You can take one skill from each row. So the further I level up, the more skills I can get. When I get to the top of a row, I can take the next card and put it in there. And I can choose what card I want in the slot that changes the icons in the middle section. So now you see I might actually decide I want this card instead. So I've got different stats. So now when I'm upgrading, I'm getting health, whilst previously I was getting range or luck. So you start to modify your talent tree, and you start to choose out the skills. And each character has different skills. So whilst the stats are the same, and you could always be a tank on any character or a healer on any character, the skills are what start to make it unique and original. And again, this is all stuff that kind of comes from that video game world, but trying to make it in a slightly more manual process, but keeping it easy to keep track of. So what you're going to find is now that game is all together, we have to go back to the world. So we created these stories, and there's a 20,000-word story that sits behind this game. And as you play through the game, you're going to play through that story. You're going to take cards, and they're going to tell you what's going on and set your objectives. When you complete those objectives, you'll move on to the next ones. And when you complete a set, then you win the game. And then next time you play, you can go back and play another set of these cards. But all of this sits within the Battle for Cloud Keep. And the good news is, if you don't like reading stories, something I've taken from a few games recently is at the bottom there's this is what you've got to do. You can not read the rest of it if you want to, and just kind of keep going. So it gives you that dynamic of reading the story or just playing through the game. As you can see, 2.5 years ago, when I started building the prototype for this game, it looked quite different. And it was something that was very complicated, very kind of basic. It was hand-drawn stuff. But over the 2.5 years, this game has gone through countless iterations, playing with video gamers and playing with board gamers, playing with D&Ders and seeing how they survive, how they get on. And the funny thing we found is, video gamers actually find this game easier to play than board gamers because they understand the mechanics, they understand the terminology. And whilst board gamers are more familiar with physical games, they're less familiar with what those kind of terms mean. So we had a hard time kind of balancing and finding a line. But over the years, as you can see, the prototypes have improved and they evolved. The top left photo there was the first ever test I did with people that weren't me. And that was probably the scariest time of my life. That version of the game took about 12 hours to play. The newest version takes about 2. So those guys were kind of unlucky, but you know, I was happy, I learned a lot, and the game evolved. And as we did this, we evolved the world. We wanted to tell this story. This is the world in all of its glory, and this is the destroyed version. And as you can see, we used the artwork to try and show the changes. So these two scenes are identical, but you can see that they are completely different because this world has now been destroyed. And as you play through this destroyed world, Even though we can't visually change the pieces, we can give you references to progress through that. This all comes together for the final game that we've got out there today. And this is the City of Kings in kind of the final rendered. This is not a photo, this is a rendered version. I'm not going to deceive you, but the final version is going to be even better than this. We're doing playtests outside in the board game section, and obviously come along and have a look. And we're releasing the game in Q1 of 2018. Right now, we've finished a Kickstarter a few months ago. We got to 998% and sold thousands of copies of this game, and it's really great to be here and talking about it. So if anyone wants to kind of start up and kind of ask any questions, whilst you're kind of forming a queue, I'm just going to stand here kind of doing a little dance and see what happens. But as I say, the City of Kings for me is a game that really is a video game inspired board game. And anyone who has played those kind of video games, these terms are going to start coming very familiar with you. And as the board game industry is growing and changing, it's not just about the City of Kings, it's about the whole industry. And you're going to find there are more and more board games out there that represent the video games that you guys love and enjoy. So I really recommend that you can go out there today as well and find as many kind of these games and just give them a try. Because whatever kind of video games you're used to, there's going to be a board game out there which is going to be something that you're going to enjoy. So I'm not sure if we have any questions going on. If you want to kind of form a queue, guys, if anyone would like to come up, I think the microphone's just coming up. Hiya.
Hey there, how's it going? A lot of the time with Kickstarted games, the biggest problem for myself, I'm an independent game store owner, is getting hold of them. Because the Kickstarter's really good at letting Joe Public and everyone else support your products and get it in there. But then actually getting them in the main marketplace space is really awkwardly hard afterwards.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just going to ask, what are your plans for mainstream distribution?
So it's always one of those difficult things, because obviously from a designer's perspective and a publisher, I want the game out there as much as possible. But that's dependent on people wanting to buy it. And the Kickstarter really gives retailers and distributors an idea of how much interest there is. So shortly after our Kickstarter finished, we had several distributors contact us and ask us if we would be willing to sell the game through them. So Estevium, who are a huge UK-based distributor, who are just outside here today, they're going to be stocking several hundred copies of the basic version of the game, and we have people in America who are going to be taking some copies as well. But for us, the City of Kings is a world, a universe. You know, this is my Star Wars, my Lord of the Rings, my Warcraft, my whatever you want to call it. And as we progress and produce more games, we're going to come back and kind of reprints and have further kind of distribution of that.
Cool. So plenty of expansions planned.
Yeah, hopefully. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering what your personal philosophy for coming up with game mechanics is.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, the second one was, like, how do you train the muscle?
For me, it's got to be interesting. I'm a firm believer of the concept of what people refer to as fun. And not so much on the City of Kings, but another game we've been working on. I actually, after a few months of development, looked at it and kind of said, this works, but is it fun to play? Do I actually want to play this game? So for me, mechanics are all about, is this a fun thing to do? And in a physical world, rather than a digital world, you have a lot of restrictions because everything you add adds cost. So I put a lot of time into saying, does this mechanic add a lot of cost to the game? Does it add a lot of weight? Is it going to cost you an extra £10 because now I need some custom things made? So the mechanics, so my philosophy really is everything that needs to be in that box needs to be something that's worth being in that box and something that I would happily pay for. So a lot of stuff got scrapped because I didn't really feel like it added enough value into the game. Does that help at all?
Yeah. So what sort of stuff do you do to, like, help you think of them? Like, is it, like, reading or...
Yeah, for me, I do a lot of kind of, I guess, just walking around and thinking about stuff. So for me, I don't personally, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, especially on like public places, but I don't read books. I've never read a book in my life, apart from at school when I was told to, and I really don't enjoy it. It's just something I've never really done. So I like to go to places and watch people play games. I like to see what people enjoy. And something that I found a lot recently is in video game world, there are so many independent games just coming out all the time. It's impossible. before. And the board game world is the same, but they're not the same as what's happening in the video game world. So I spend a lot of time watching what I think is interesting in video games and seeing how I could convert that into a physical kind of idea.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hey, yeah.
So I'm a big board game and tabletop player myself, and City of Kings really interested me as I love to try these different RPGs and such. And as a tabletop player playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was wondering what does City of Kings bring that I couldn't do in Dungeons and Dragons, or what would entice someone who plays Dungeons and Dragons to want to pick up City of Kings?
Okay, so there's a few things. I mean, the first thing with City of Kings is it's a kind of condensed experience. So with the City of Kings, whilst you play through these stories, you're going to be able to play it in an evening and know that you've completed it. And then you can come back and play again, but you don't have to play with the same group of people. Things are different, things have reset. So you've got kind of an easier way of playing it with a different group of people. And the second side to that is you don't need a kind of a dungeon master or a GM or anything. The game is entirely controlled by the game itself. It's you and your friends going on an adventure through this world, and whatever happens is what happens, but you don't need to have another guy sat there kind of making those decisions.
Yeah, that's a very good point, yeah. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Hello. I saw on the info sheet that there's 6 characters and also 1 to 4 players. Mm-hmm. However, is there a reason why it's 6 characters and 4 players? Is it just it gets too busy, or...?
There's a couple of reasons for it. So a lot of board games like to target the 4-player market just because it's kind of a good count. With a physical product, obviously, you need to be able to finish that game in that session because you don't really have the same way of saving it. And the more players you add, you're either taking away the options that each player has, so each person does less, or you're extending the length of the game. So I found that when you had 5 or 6, you were really reducing the amount of time, like the amount of turns. So a good example of that is in the 4-player game, on your turn, you do 4 actions. If we were doing a 5-player game, then on your turn you would be doing 3 actions, which means each person's going to be doing that little bit less. The reason we put 6 characters in the box is because I grew up with a brother, and I was always player 2, and I always got told that I'm that character because he's that one. So I wanted to introduce 6 characters so the last player still could choose who they wanted to be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, cheers.
Cool, thank you.
Hey. So Shut Up and Sit Down recently did their Twilight Imperium documentary, and one of the things that came out of that was they had all these great ideas for the 4th edition of Twilight Imperium, and then 6 months later budgeted it all up and said, oh, this game's going to cost $400. Was there any moment like that that you went, oh, I've done too much?
Yeah, so the City of Kings is a big game. You know, it's not a kind of a £5 deck of cards. It's a big, proper kind of filled box of stuff. And with that comes a lot of complication because we could have added more. You know, we're trying to build an open world. We want to have, you know, everything you can do in an RPG in this world, but that adds more cost, like you say. So there was a lot of times where I kind of said, is this too much? And when I got the original quotes for manufacturing, the price was about 4 times more than I wanted it to be. And it was very much that situation. But what I did is I spent a lot of time refining stuff. So I come from a UX background, a user experience background, which is all about kind of making the experiences easier for people, making them more enjoyable. So I spent a lot of time looking at each piece saying, how can I refine this into something else? Can I use this one card for 2 tasks so I don't need to have 2 separate sets of cards? And we spent a lot of time refining it and trying to putting it in. And we ended up with a system where it was very much a 1 in, 1 out. I gave every single thing in the game a value based on the manufacturing costs, the interest in the mechanics. And I said to myself, this is the total value of this game. Anything that comes in, something else or multiple things need to come out to try and keep that at that level. And it became quite painful sometimes, but the end result is a very refined game. And when you give yourself those limitations, you force yourself to make something better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hiya. Referring to your graph,
Yeah.
there was a thing that caught my attention. Obviously, everything has a reason and a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered why there was a sudden spike in difficulty around level 8 in terms of your enemies.
Okay, so I would say that the exact numbers in that graph are very much more of a kind of to represent the point rather than the specifics. but the creatures do very much ramp up. And there's a really good reason for this. So basically, when you're playing the game, your character is going to progress a lot. If you play like a lot of video games, you can play for 50 hours before you get from the start to the end. In olden games, you could play for like 200 hours, but that's been reduced, and you're kind of forced into compressing how much you power up. And I wanted people to feel like they were going to power up. So when you start the game, you're going to start at level 1, and you're going to do 1 damage, you're going to heal for 1, and you're going to be able to move a bit. As you progress through the game, you can get to a point where you can do 10 damage, or you'll have 25 health, or you'll become really powerful in your specialization. And I really wanted to ramp this up. So what this means is the creatures need to ramp up equally as it counters it, and it works out as a kind of a self-balancing system. So if you get to a creature and you spawn a creature and you get some abilities and it's too hard for you, because you can then take another option and you'll skip through some other things, you'll quickly become much more powerful. So each thing after that becomes much more powerful, and then you become much more powerful. So anything that was a challenge for you 20 minutes ago should now be much easier, and it allows you to kind of reduce what's on the board and kind of get rid of some of those complexities. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Great, thank you. Cool. Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that. And obviously, please do come out and play the game. And if you're not here in person, then the website is thecityofkings.com, and you're more than welcome to come and get in touch with us. Thank you very much.